In this video, I'm going to share with you how to hit the easy button on finding an incredibly high-performing short-term rental in today's market, one that cash flows and can be used as a really great tax write-off against your active income. My wife and I used this strategy of investing in these small multi-unit, high cash-flowing short-term rentals to get to a place of financial freedom about 4 years ago. And before working together, we personally meet with anyone who's interested in working on this strategy with us to find out what are some of the biggest challenges that you're running into when it comes to investing in short-term rentals. And by far, the biggest challenge is finding the right market and finding the right type of deal. So today, I'm going to simplify that entire process for you and show you how it's possible to find super high performing deals in today's market. So today, it seems like anyone who's talking about short-term rentals seems to be fixated on these mainstream traditional vacation rental areas, typically higher end, where everyone's flocking and kind of fighting over these typically single family, expensive vacation homes. And instead, what I'm going to share with you today is an alternative method that can produce much higher results. So I'm going to share with my screen with you and just show you what this looks like. So I created what I call the big four conditions that create the ultimate short-term rental deal. So you can see these are each individual conditions, but where they overlap in the middle, if you can find a place where you have all of these at the same time, you've just found yourself a super high-performing short-term rental. So typically, I like to start in an area that's relatively low cost per square foot compared to a relatively high nightly rate and occupancy. And you find these areas typically just outside of larger cities where price per square foot is much lower than in the city, but you're still close enough to the city where it drives up that nightly rate and occupancy. The second thing is multiple units. So when you run the numbers on a property that has 2, 3, 4 units worth of income, especially ones that are in these budget-friendly areas, you start to see that the net cash flow, the profit that you make on a monthly basis is so much higher than these single-family one stream of income. Even if the nightly rate per unit is less or lower than that single family one stream of income, because you have 2 or 3 or 4 of them, the net cash flow is much, much higher. And then you combine that with some local draws. So again, just outside of cities, a lot of times you can find a place where there's maybe water parks, or there's a museum, or there's a traveling sports facility, or there's, like where we're at, beach, we've got Lake Michigan, there's casinos, there's an outlet mall, there's all these different local draws that don't have to be Disney World or some mainstream draw like that, but they can be areas that attract people for weekend getaways or short staycations. And then in addition to that, you supplement those vacation rentals with just regular reasons that people travel. Because anytime you're close to population, people are going to die, right? And so there's going to be funerals. And so family is going to fly in to go to those funerals. And where do they stay? They stay at either a hotel or they stay at a comparably priced short-term rental. And so if they can have a kitchen and sleep more people, they're coming in with their family, they'd much rather stay in a short-term rental. People travel for work. Traveling nurses travel for several months at a time. People travel to visit families for weddings. All these different just general reasons people travel for will exist anywhere where there's a population concentration. So if you find an area where all 4 of these overlap, you just found yourself a really high cash flowing short-term rental area. So let's dive into this in practical terms, and I'll show you how to find markets and properties that kind of hit these big 4 criteria without spending months of your life doing so. So I like to start with the lowest hanging fruit. And what most people do when they come over to realtor.com and start searching for deals is they put in a specific town. And then in that town, they might not find their ideal type of deal. And then they say, well, this doesn't work. It's too difficult. And yeah, there might not be a perfect deal for you on the market in a specific town right then. And so you can set up searches if you have a specific town that you're interested in, so that throughout the year, as great deals pop up, you can be the first one to be notified, and then you can reach out to that listing agent and try to get that property under contract. But if you're looking to find a property relatively quickly, you might want to expand your search. And so I like to start in the Midwest because that's just the lowest hanging fruit, the lowest cost per square foot. So as an example today, we're going to use the state of Wisconsin. And so I search by the entire state first, and then I narrow down. And so when you put in the state of Wisconsin, you can see that there's 30,530 homes for sale right now. listings on the MLS. And so that's a lot of properties to sort through and just start scanning through properties. So what I'm looking for is the lowest hanging fruit. And remember, one of the big four is multi-units. So I can go here to property type and I can put in multifamily and then hit done. And this is going to bring up primarily 1 to 4 units, because once you get above 4 units, that's considered commercial and that's on a different listing service. But this is going to show you 1 through 4 units, which is primary type of property that can produce really, really excellent cash flow. And so it went from 30,000 properties on the market to 1,247 here. And so then you can start looking at the other parts of the big four. So we got multi-unit, but now we want to look at areas not just out in the middle of nowhere, right? You want to be close to population centers, have some local draws, and then a relatively decent nightly rate and occupancy compared to a low purchase price. And so Wisconsin overall is just really inexpensive, right? So you kind of check that box, but you want to look for areas where there's going to be some local draws and you're going to have some bookings as well. So as you zoom in, I like this whole eastern part of Wisconsin because there is population and there are some local draws. It varies from town to town, but as I was looking at this right before I recorded this video, I zoomed into Oshkosh, which is an area where there's a couple people actually who I've worked with who have purchased properties, and I know this can work really well. So a decent population, not too far from some other decent population areas, and then some local draws there. It's right on a lake, and there's some industry. There's this regional airport. There's a college in town. And so as you zoom in, you can start to see these multi-unit property listing prices, and you can hover over them and click on them and see the different properties. And so what you're looking for is just at first glance, ones that look a little bit more turnkey, right? Unless you want to do a big rehab. But my suggestion is always to buy something that is relatively turnkey, because if you pick the right area where these big four overlap, you can start cash flowing really well right from the start. You don't have to go through a big rehab. So I identified this one earlier today as I was just scanning through because it's a 2-unit property. Both are 2-bedroom, 1 bath, almost 2,000 square foot for $135,000. And I believe it's relatively turnkey just based off the description. Now there's no interior pictures, so I'm sure it needs some work, but I think it's relatively turnkey. So I did add some rehab budget for now in my numbers, but I just want to show you how to go through this then. So next thing I do typically is I go to Google Maps and I pull up exactly where this is. So one thing I like about this, again, close to some local draws, you got University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh right next to it. So you've got this university where there's always stuff going on, right? There's professors that need to stay temporarily a lot of times. There's guest speakers that come in. There's sports. There's, lots of stuff that happens at a college. And then it's in this town where there's a decent amount of population and just people are going to come into town and visit family and do all the normal travel things as well. And then I always like to look at the street view just to make sure it's in a decent neighborhood and it looks like it's decent. It's nothing like super high end or anything like that, but there's nothing that makes me worried about this neighborhood just from the street view. Then I like to look at AirDNA. And so first I plug in Oshkosh and I go to the overview tab here. And so on average, across all the short-term rentals in the area, there's 45% occupancy rate and a 320 average daily rate. Now, this submarket is pretty big and it also has a lot of properties right on the water. So sometimes when you have waterfront, it can skew that average daily rate a bit. I don't recommend just using that as your average daily rate because this property isn't going to produce the same numbers as a property that's like $1 million property right on the lake, but it just gives you a gauge of, is there desire to rent in this area? And so if there is, then, you can dig into the actual comparables right by that property. Then you can look at the occupancy curve and see, okay, how seasonal is it? This is a pretty seasonal area. Definitely goes up in June, July. That's when you're going to want to make most of your profit is in these summer months. And then it kind of tapers off in the winter months. And so then you can actually put the address into Airbnb itself. And when you do that, you can see 813 Cherry Street comes up right here. And then it shows you all the top short-term rentals around it. And so when you're looking at that, then you can just scroll through and look for similar properties like apartments, like this. Here's another apartment. Here's another apartment. Here's another apartment. And you can see, how does it compare to the property that we're considering buying? This is a 1-bedroom. The ones that we're going to be purchasing are 2-bedroom, 1-bath units, right? And so then you can see the nightly rate, what they're charging. And this is a combination of the nightly rate, the cleaning fee, and the Airbnb fees that they charge. So just keep that in mind as you're looking at the nightly rate. But at that price point, they have a lot of bookings. So it might be an indicator that they're a little bit low on their price because this is kind of a slower season typically, but yet they have the entire next month booked out and then half the month afterwards already. So it gives you an indicator as to where your pricing should be in comparison. Then you can look at previous reviews, read through all the reviews, look at when they were left, and if there's any gaps in their bookings. And then you can do the same thing for another property. Here's another 2-bed, 1-bath. Perfect. This is exactly the type of property that we're going to offer. We're going to market it better than this, though. Do a better job. It's not too difficult to dominate competition in these smaller markets because people just don't take the marketing serious when it comes to creating their listings. So here's one that's performing extremely well, 40 reviews, 5 stars, and they're at 167 per night. And you can look in this season, you can also look in the off season, in the opposite season, just to see how they're performing, but lots of bookings on their calendar as well. So a lot of times people will say, well, why would somebody book in these smaller markets? There's so many different reasons people travel. And so you can see there's people booking. And so if you look in a market and there's no bookings on calendars, that's a bad sign. But at these price points, you know that there's lots of bookings happening and you can read the reviews and it tells you exactly when people stayed there. A lot of times they tell you how long they stayed, what they loved about the place, and you get so much data that way. So then from there, you can just plug your numbers into the analyzer tool, which you can download and you can use as well. But this one has a purchase price of $135, and that's if we don't negotiate. Right now, a lot of times you can negotiate lower prices, but we'll just run it at $135. We'll assume that there's an ARV of $225 or after repair value. We're going to assume we're going to put in about $40,000. So you can plug that in there. Furnishing costs, we'll assume about $15,000 per unit. We're going to use a 75% DSCR loan, which is just an investment loan that is very easy to get. The bank will give you 75% as long as the property cash flows, and this one will, I promise you. And then we use conservative numbers based off the comps. So we just looked at comparable short-term rentals, and we could see where their numbers are in different seasons. And so in the high season, $160 per night is very doable for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. We're counting the high season as 120 days, so mostly just like the summer time. And we're going to assume about an 80% occupancy during that time. And then in the low season, we're going to assume $120 per night, 45% occupancy, and that's the rest of the year. And so if that's the case, after you add in your cleaning fees, you're at $5,304 of monthly income. So I'm going to just expand this a little bit bigger. So if that's the case, then you subtract out your mortgage, which automatically calculates. So all the yellow cells automatically calculate your insurance, your taxes, your cleaning fees. You can put in anything you want as a placeholder for your utilities and Wi-Fi, lawn and snow removal, consumables, maintenance. And what you're left with then is about $2,690 in net cash flow, if these are the numbers. That gives you a 30% cash on cash return. I've never seen this property. I came across this about a half hour ago as I was just scanning through Wisconsin because it looked like a high potential deal. But even if I'm off on this deal by if it rents for $100 a night, $140 in the high season, $100 a night in the low season, I'm still like, we can run those numbers. I'm still sitting on $2,000 of net monthly cash flow on a property that is extremely affordable. I paid $135,000 for and put about $40 into it and making over $2,000 of monthly cash flow. So that's the power of investing in these really affordable, high cash flowing, relatively high nightly rate and occupancy areas that kind of meet that big 4 criteria. Now, this type of property at this price isn't going to give you a huge tax savings. If you want to utilize the short-term rental loophole, like I've talked about in previous videos, you can go back and check out how that works. And so for a lot of people, though, they're not as concerned about the tax savings. They just want to create as much cash flow as possible and get out of their W-2 job as quickly as possible for the least amount of cost. And this is the type of property that does that really, really well because you're all into it for such a low amount of capital. But there's other people who are high income earners that also want to create more income, but also want to offset a big chunk of their W-2 income. They're getting murdered on their W-2 taxes. Some people are paying 6 figures in taxes to the IRS every year, and they could utilize this strategy to potentially offset and not pay a dime in taxes. So I want to show you what that looks like in a different market. So right now in Florida, a lot of people are reading that prices are softening a little bit, right? And it's becoming more of a buyer's market than a seller's market because it appreciated so quickly. They built a lot of properties, and now it's softening. Some places more than others, but overall, as a state, you can start to find some deals, right? And typically, I target just outside of the more mainstream areas, not the highest end vacation rental mainstream areas, but just outside. It can still work in a market like Florida that people think of more traditionally as a vacation rental market. So as I was looking at this earlier, I kind of like this Space Coast area. This whole area over by Cape Canaveral, they kind of call it the Space Coast. And I've seen some great deals pop up in this area. It's relatively affordable, and it can kind of check the box, a lot of the different big four factors. So again, we're going to go to multifamily properties. And so now that eliminates a lot of them in this area. And so as I was looking at this earlier, I came across this property. And so this is a multi-unit property, very similar to what I was referring to with the big four. And this is listed for $1.3 million. So obviously a much higher price point. But instead of buying a single family home, which a lot of high income earners do, they take advantage of this short-term rental loophole. And so they'll go out and buy this $1 million single family home that doesn't cash flow. They can't use it as a long-term rental if there's a financial meltdown or rule change or whatever. And so they're kind of struggling then with this property down the road because they get stuck with it and there's no backup option. If everyone's trying to sell at the same time, there's no backup option. But with a multi-unit, even if you buy a more expensive one so that you can take advantage of the big tax write-off that this is going to provide once you depreciate it, if you buy a multi-unit, this can work as a long-term rental, as a backup, but it works really well as a short-term rental. So this one in particular is, again, turnkey. It was just recently rehabbed. So you can see the pictures. It looks really nice inside. Different units have different characteristics, and different levels of rehab. It's a very unique property, but it's right on the water. So most of the units have a view of the water across the street, and it's 12 units. And this has been on the market for quite some time. And so it's a mix of 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom units. It doesn't tell you the exact breakdown, so we're just going to err on the most conservative end of things. And I just want to show you what 12 units worth of short-term rental income could look like. So then I go to the map and see where it is. It's right on this Indian River. And then you can see what it looks like from the outside. So looks pretty cool. Right across from a hotel over here, and then some other high-end properties right on the Indian River right here. Looks like a pretty nice area. You've got a whole bunch of parking in the back behind the unit. Then you go to AirDNA, and you can see the occupancy rate for this area is 57%. The average daily rate's 190. You can see what the occupancy curve looks like. Kind of dips in the fall and then just increases all the way through the winter and then kind of drops off a little bit again in spring. So then when you put the address in, very similarly, lots of similar types of properties come up. So I'm looking at guest suites, I'm looking at apartments, I'm looking at attached properties that are 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom units. And so this one is a studio and very similar to the types of pictures that we just saw on the listing, right? Then here's another one. It's a 2-bedroom, so you can see what a 2-bedroom does, and you can look at the price point, the nightly rate, and see, now and then in February in the peak season, because right now we're actually in the lowest season, so you can see what the price point is in February, and then right now they have a few bookings coming up here at the end of August, and then kind of empty in September. So at this price point, they may need to be a little bit more competitive on their pricing here. And you can do that for a whole bunch of properties just to get an idea of the range of what you can expect. And then when you pull up the analyzer for this one, so we're just going to assume, because this has been sitting on the market for so long, that we could get it for 1.1. And we'll have closing costs of about $25,000, after repair value of 1.3 once everything's all set up and everything. Annual property taxes are $17,800. Annual insurance, we're going to estimate about $10,000. Repair costs about $40,000, even though it's basically turnkey. There's always updates to do. And then furnishing about $120,000. So that's $10,000 per unit, which it might not take that since some of the units are pretty small studios, but we'll just err on the more conservative side. So if that's the case, and we have 12 units, you can see that in the high season, if we're estimating on the larger units, the 2 and 3 bedrooms, and I'm just assuming there's 3 of them. I'm going to go on the light side there, and then the rest are all 1 bedrooms. So I'm assuming that the 2 and 3 bedrooms will average about 200 a night, and then the 1 bedroom is about 175. And we're only counting 120 days as the peak season. And we're going to count a 60% occupancy. So 40% of the time, all of these units can sit vacant, and these numbers will still shake out this way. Then the low season, $140 and $100. So $100 a night right on the water in Florida. It's pretty affordable compared to a hotel, right? And so we're only estimating a 35% for the other 8 months out of the year. That's pretty conservative estimates that I think would be pretty easy to hit. And so if this is the case, we're going to bring in $270,000 before any cleaning fees because there's 12 units. Like it just, as you add these units up, it starts to really compound in terms of income, and it can compound in terms of expense too. That's why you don't want to take on a huge project with that many units. But if it's something that's turnkey, that's great. And then you add in your cleaning fees, and so you're up to almost $300,000 in income on this property on an annual basis. That's $24,638 per month. You can see what your mortgage is. Pretty affordable compared to this type of income. Your insurance, property taxes, cleaning fees, utilities, and Wi-Fi. Just again, we're trying to estimate on the high side, $1,000 a month of consumables like toilet paper, paper towels, stuff like that. And then we're going to add in $1,000 of maintenance every month, which I don't think we're going to hit $1,000 of maintenance required every month, but at some point you're going to have to replace the roof and the HVAC system and stuff like that. So it's nice to have a set aside and count that as an expense. And then you go to your deal calculations, and you can see if this is the case and these really conservative numbers are true, you're making basically $11,000 of net cash flow on this property on a monthly basis. And that's a 28, almost a 30% cash on cash return if these numbers work out this way. And again, these are conservative, but even if you screw it up and you made a few thousand less than that on a monthly basis, that's still a really, really great income, right? And so you compare that to a lot of these properties, these $1 million single family homes that by the time you've paid your expenses on them, you're breaking even on a monthly basis. And so you get that big tax write-off, but then you're not making any money on it on a monthly basis. So this is actually like financial freedom type of net cash flow, and you get this huge tax write-off against your W-2 income if you're a high income earner, because you can use that short-term rental loophole. So the intent of this video is to show you that it doesn't need to take months to find a great deal, and that you can find a great deal in this market by just starting with the lowest hanging fruit, searching by state in the states where it's relatively affordable, and you can start to then narrow down within that state to places where it kind of meets that big 4 criteria. So if this type of strategy makes sense to you and you'd like to work with me personally through the entire process of figuring out the right market, the right type of property, the right type of financing, purchasing the property, and setting up all your management systems going forward, you can set up a call with me at the link that's in the description below. You can just click on the link. It takes you to a short questionnaire, and then it'll take you to my calendar from there, and you can book a time with me, and we can talk through your goals and the details of the program and see if it's a good fit for what you're looking to do. I appreciate you taking time to check out this video. I know it's sort of a technical video, but hopefully it was beneficial for you today. God bless, and I'll see you in the next video.